The Akamarian Confederation desperately begged for humanity's aid, as vicious alien warships bombarded their home cities into rubble. A dimly lit auditorium was packed with young Akamarian students, listening with rapt attention as an elderly historian named Orion recounted the apocalyptic invasion that nearly destroyed his people a century ago. His luminescent eyes shone with emotion as he described the Zorgons, a cruel empire of warlike aliens that had already enslaved dozens of worlds before setting their sights on Akamar Prime. The Zorgon fleet of massive dreadnoughts appeared in our skies like a plague of locusts, blotting out the twin suns. Their Emperor Kragthar was a heartless monster, demanding our total surrender or extinction, Orion said, his voice quivering. He pulled up holographic displays of Zorgon warships, jagged knife-like craft bristling with planet-scorching weapons. Gasps echoed through the auditorium as the children saw footage of their exploration vessels crumpling like foil under a hail of Zorgon missiles. When the planetary bombardment began and their troop landers invaded our soil, we knew our advanced medical technology was useless in the face of such brutality. This was an enemy that had to be met with force. Prime Minister Zor-El and the High Council sent desperate pleas for military aid to the wider galaxy, praying that someone, anyone, would help us fight back against Kragthar's horde. Orion paused, letting the suspense hang in the air. When our comm channels finally crackled to life, we couldn't believe which species answered the call. The humans, from a distant blue marble called Earth. The children murmured to each other in awe. The deeds of humanity were legendary, but they had never heard the full story of how a few human ships turned the tide to save an entire alien race from annihilation. Understand, young ones, without the humans' aid, I would not be standing before you today. None of us would. They were our only hope against a ruthless enemy that wanted to butcher us into extinction. If the human fleet failed to break the Zorgon blockade, there would be no future for the Akamarian people. We would be slaughtered down to the last child. The room fell silent as Orion's words hung in the air. The children leaned forward, eager to hear more about these mysterious humans who had come to their ancestors' aid in their darkest hour. Orion took a deep breath, his eyes distant as he recalled the events of a century past. At first we were skeptical of the humans' ability to help us, he continued, his voice low and thoughtful. They were a relatively new species on the galactic stage, known for their technological advancements and their propensity for warfare. But they had never faced a threat as formidable as the Zorgons. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. However, the High Council was desperate. We had no other choice, so we agreed to meet with a delegation from the United Earth Federation led by Admiral Nolan Perry. Orion pulled up a holographic image of the Admiral, a tall, muscular human, with short, greying hair and a battle-hardened face. The meeting took place aboard our flagship, the ACS Solaris. Prime Minister Zor-El and Admiral Perry discussed the terms of the UEF's assistance. The humans would provide military support, but in exchange they wanted access to our medical technology. A murmur rippled through the auditorium. The Akamarians' medical technology was closely guarded, a source of great pride and power. Orion nodded, acknowledging their surprise. Prime Minister Zor-El was hesitant, but he knew the survival of our people was at stake. He agreed to the terms. Suddenly alarms blared throughout the auditorium, causing the children to jump in their seats. Orion raised a hand, calming them. That's what it sounded like when the Zorgon fleet entered our system, rapidly approaching Akamar Prime. He pulled up a holographic display of the ensuing battle, the human ships sleek and heavily armed, moving to intercept the Zorgon fleet. Admiral Perry wasted no time. He ordered his flagship, the UES Prometheus, to lead a strike force against the incoming armada. The remaining Akamarian vessels took up defensive positions around the planet. Orion's voice grew tense as he described the battle, one of the most pivotal moments in Akamarian history. The children watched in awe as the human ships, despite being outnumbered, proved more than a match for the Zorgon warships. Their advanced weaponry and tactical superiority caught the Zorgons off guard. For within hours, the invading fleet was in full retreat, Orion said, a note of triumph in his voice. The Akamarians watched as the human ships, battered but victorious, returned to orbit around Akamar Prime. He pulled up a final image, Admiral Perry and Prime Minister Zor-El shaking hands, their faces covered in sweat and grime. Admiral Perry personally congratulated Prime Minister Zor-El on the success of their joint operation, but both leaders knew this was only the beginning of a long and difficult campaign to defeat the Zorgon Empire and ensure the safety of our people. Orion paused, letting the enormity of the situation sink in. The children sat in stunned silence, processing the incredible tale they had just heard. They knew the humans had saved their species, but they had never heard the details of how close they had come to annihilation. As the children sat in stunned silence, processing the incredible tale they had just heard, Orion continued his narration, shifting his focus to the aftermath of the initial battle. He described how the Akamarians and humans began working together to fortify Akamar Prime's defenses, preparing for the inevitable Zorgon counterattack. Human engineers, led by Chief Technical Officer Marcus Reeves, worked tirelessly alongside our scientists, Orion said, pulling up a holographic image of a tall, lanky human with a shock of red hair and piercing blue eyes. Together, they upgraded our shield generators and developed new weapon systems capable of repelling Zorgon assaults. He paused, letting the image of Reeves and his team, hunched over control panels and schematics, sink in. Meanwhile, Admiral Perry and his staff collaborated with our military leadership to devise a strategy for taking the fight to the Zorgons. They identified key supply lines and military installations that, if targeted, could significantly weaken the Empire's ability to wage war. Orion's expression grew grim as he continued. But as our preparations continued, a new threat emerged. Zorgon infiltrators, disguised as Akamarian refugees, managed to slip past our security checkpoints and began sabotaging key infrastructure across the planet. He pulled up a security feed, showing a group of Akamarians hurrying through a crowded street. Suddenly, one of them broke away from the group and ducked into an alleyway. One such infiltrator, a cunning operative named Zaktar, successfully planted explosive devices in our main power grid, causing widespread blackouts and disrupting our defenses. The children gasped as the footage showed the city plunging into darkness, the distant sound of explosions echoing through the auditorium. Orion nodded solemnly. Admiral Perry, recognizing the grave danger posed by these infiltrators, assigned his best Special Forces unit, led by Captain Jack Harrison, to hunt down and eliminate the Zorgon agents. A new image appeared, showing a group of heavily armed humans, their faces painted with camouflage patterns, moving silently through the shadows. Harrison and his team, known as the Ghost Walkers, began a deadly game of cat and mouse with Zaktar and his operatives, engaging in intense close-quarters combat in the streets and alleyways of our capital city. Orion's voice grew tense as he recounted a particularly harrowing encounter between Captain Harrison and Zaktar in the city's central market. The children leaned forward in their seats, their eyes wide as they watched the two figures, one human and one Zorgon, engaged in a fierce hand-to-hand battle amidst a panicked crowd of Akamarian civilians. Harrison ducked and weaved, his movements a blur as he dodged Zaktar's vicious attacks. The Zorgon operative was a master of close-quarters combat, his strikes precise and deadly. But Harrison was no ordinary soldier. He had been trained in the most advanced hand-to-hand combat techniques the UEF had to offer. As the battle raged on, Zaktar managed to land a glancing blow with a hidden blade, the weapon laced with a potent Zorgon poison. Harrison grimaced in pain, but refused to yield. With a final desperate effort, he launched himself at Zaktar, grappling the Zorgon to the ground and applying a chokehold that slowly drained the life from his opponent. The children cheered as Orion described Harrison's victory, the human captain standing tall amidst the chaos, his message clear. The Zorgon Empire's underhanded tactics would not be tolerated. With the immediate threat of infiltrators dealt with, Admiral Perry and Prime Minister Zor-El turned their attention back to the looming Zorgon invasion fleet, Orion said, his voice growing heavy with anticipation. The stage was set for a final, decisive battle that would determine the fate of our people and the balance of power in the galaxy. As Orion's voice grew heavy with the weight of the story, the children in the auditorium leaned forward, eyes wide with anticipation. The old historian took a deep breath, steadying himself before continuing his tale. Admiral Perry stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, his hands gripping the railings as he stared out at the approaching Zorgon fleet. The message from UEF High Command had been a devastating blow. Earth itself was under attack, and a significant portion of the human fleet was being recalled to defend their homeworld. Perry knew that he would have to face the impending Zorgon onslaught with a diminished force, but he refused to let despair take hold. Next to him, Prime Minister Zor-El's holographic image flickered, his face etched with worry. "Admiral, what are we going to do? We can't possibly face the Zorgons with our current numbers." Perry turned to face the Akamarian leader, his eyes hard with determination. "We're not going to face them head-on, Prime Minister. We're going to lure them into a trap." He quickly outlined his plan. They would feign weakness, allowing the Zorgons to approach Akamar Prime unopposed. Once the enemy fleet was within range, a hidden fleet of Akamarian and human ships, equipped with experimental cloaking technology, would launch a surprise attack from behind, catching the Zorgons in a devastating crossfire. Zor-El nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "It's a dangerous gambit, Admiral, but it might be our only chance." As the Zorgon fleet entered orbit around Akamar Prime, the UES Prometheus and its remaining allies took up defensive positions. The tension on the bridge was palpable as every eye watched the viewscreen, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Suddenly the screen flickered, and the grim visage of Emperor Kragthar himself appeared, his eyes burning with malice. "Surrender now, Akamarians, and I may spare your pathetic lives. As for you, human interlopers, prepare to be exterminated." Admiral Perry stepped forward, his face set in grim defiance. "I have a counteroffer, Kragthar. Go to hell." With that, he nodded to his weapons officer, who fired the first shot, a blazing torpedo that streaked towards the Zorgon flagship. All hell broke loose as the Zorgon fleet opened fire, their ships unleashing volleys of plasma torpedoes and ion cannons. The UES Prometheus shuddered under the onslaught, its shields straining to absorb the brutal impacts. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and crew members were thrown to the deck as the ship bucked and heaved. At that moment, the cloaked Akamarian and human ships, led by Commodore Elena Ivanova aboard the ACS Shadowblade, emerged from hiding behind the Zorgon fleet. They opened fire, catching the enemy's rear guard completely by surprise. The Zorgons, now trapped between two forces, fought back with savage ferocity, their ships turning to face the new threat. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Admiral Perry wiped blood from a deep gash on his forehead, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. The ship shuddered again as another volley of plasma torpedoes slammed into its hull, breaching entire decks and exposing them to the vacuum of space. Fires raged throughout the ship, and the screams of the wounded and dying echoed through the corridors. But Perry refused to give up. He rallied his crew, his voice rising above the chaos. "Keep fighting. We can't let them win. For Akamar, for Earth, for every world the Zorgons have ever threatened, we stand here and we fight." As Orion paused, the children in the auditorium were on the edge of their seats, their hearts pounding with the intensity of the story. In the heart of the maelstrom, Admiral Perry gripped the rail of the Prometheus's bridge, his mind racing. Consoles exploded, bodies flew, the lights flickered. They had to end this now, or all would be lost. "Helm, set a collision course for the dread—" The bridge lurched violently, throwing Perry to the deck. Ears ringing, he hauled himself up, blood dripping into his eyes. "Set a collision course for the Zorgon flagship," he roared. "Maximum thrust." "But, sir, that's suicide—" "Do it, Lieutenant!" The helmsman punched it, the Prometheus accelerating on a terminal course, the viewscreen filled with the jagged hull of the ZIS dreadnought, looming closer. On the dreadnought's bridge, Emperor Kragthar's eyes widened in disbelief. That human couldn't be— "Pervasive maneuvers," Kragthar bellowed. Hard to port. Too late. The Prometheus slammed into the dreadnought's flank at full impulse. A blinding flash seared through space, a sun born and snuffed in an instant. The shockwave rippled out, tossing ships like toys. Debris peppered the void, twisted shards of humanity's greatest warship, mingled with the splintered corpse of Zorgon might. Aboard the Shadowblade, Commodore Ivanova gripped her armrests, knuckles white as the flash faded. Where the Prometheus should be, nothing. Just an expanding field of wreckage. "Admiral Perry," she whispered, numb. Then her training kicked in. "Sensors, status of the enemy flagship?" "Destroyed, sir," the officer reported, voice shaking. "The Zorgon fleet is in disarray. Their command structure is shattered." Ivanova straightened, a cold fury settling over her. Perry's sacrifice would not be in vain. "All ships press the attack," she barked. "Target their weapons, engines, shield generators. Don't let up until they surrender, or we've turned them into cosmic dust." The Akamarian and human vessels surged forward as one, pouring sheets of fire into the milling Zorgon ships. Without Kragthar's iron hand, the invaders fought as individuals, not a cohesive force. One by one their ships splintered and died under the onslaught. Hulls cracked open, spilling bodies and atmosphere into the pitiless void. Finally it was over. The last Zorgon ship struck its colors, signaling surrender. An eerie quiet descended, the silence of the graveyard. Ivanova slumped back, exhausted, triumphant, and filled with sorrow. The cost, God, the cost, friends, comrades, Perry himself, all consigned to the abyss. The Prometheus, that valiant metal warrior, nothing but drifting atoms now. On Akamar Prime, Prime Minister Zorel received the news, tears tracking his face. They had won. His people would live. But the price, how could he ever repay such a debt? Human blood had bought Akamarian freedom. The names of the fallen would echo through their history unto eternity. In the following days, as the shattered fleets limped into space dock, a new accord rose from the ashes of war. Human and Akamarian stood together, their fates and futures inextricably bound. Two species, forged in the crucible of battle, united by sacrifice and blood against the dark. And on the fringes, the gutted Zorgon war machine slunk away, a broken thing, toothless and clawless. Never again would their shadow darken the stars. But the wounds of war would linger long. Some scars never fade. Orion surveyed the sea of young faces before him, solemn and still. The lesson was plain in their eyes, the terrible nature of war, the awful calculus of survival. Freedom was never free. It was bought with the blood of heroes. His voice rang out, clear and strong. "Never forget the humans who fell so that we might live. It is our duty to build a galaxy worthy of their courage, a future shaped by their selfless valor. In the darkest night, they were our guiding light, and so they shall forever remain." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.